Hi there, everyone. I hope that you have been enjoying and finding some use in the videos you've already watched. My overall goal is not just to tell you how to open a business, but also to help you determine if it is the right thing for you or not. So to get further along on, is this really what you want to do in place of working some other kind of stressful job? I'm going to go over a few things. Some of this I may have already gone over. Other is additional information to consider based on what you're already processing about, is this worth it to you? The cons of the general cons of just having a business, is it worth all the pros to you? A lot of people get into owning a company and they don't realize the reality of how much stress it is, where they're working 60 to 80 hours a week. And you could be working tons more hours making the same profit. But because you could be working a lot more making the same profit, you could also be working a lot more making less money. The reality is it's an unsteady income. There will be patterns, and it's perceived that good businesses are always growing, but that's not the reality, especially in a low economic time such as the Great Recession. Companies at that point just keeping at the same amount of business or to have decreased in sales but not too bad were lucky. But it was one time not to expect growth at all. But that didn't mean necessarily if your business was one that had lost sales and was suffering, that with how many were suffering, and just the whole idea of that it was some kind of Great Recession. I mean, that's the whole thing that made it, is that so many businesses were losing money and they may not necessarily be reporting net losses, but still owners are working more and making less money. And for those that remember the Great Recession, and that being that most of us, unless you just graduated college or you just graduated high school, then you would know how costly it was, how it was a long period of time, relatively speaking, to be losing money or not making money, or to barely even be able to have a roof over your head or your family. And that said, even in good years where our economy is in a good standing, you will have your good and bad seasons. Some companies like construction have longer bad season, which is the fall, let's say September through the spring of maybe April or May. But then the good season of only April or May through August. So some businesses like that, the good season is a lot longer, so it's a lot tougher to get through the hard season since it's more time and it's a time when you're making a lot less. Therefore, those are businesses where you have to save a lot more in your savings account, and usually that means prices are higher for the service or product sold, so that you as a company can survive and still produce more every year in good economic times, or just break even, being that what you make this year, you make next year. But the reality of it all is that it's still unsteady income. You're still not guaranteed a check tomorrow, even though you can be working more or the same. But the pro to that is then you can work less hours and make the same amount of money, potentially, especially after your company's been founded and you have trustworthy staff, trustworthy managers that are for your interest, and they're not making your employees do different things than what you would want them to do, or they're not stealing from you or whatever. Once you get it founded, stable, well on its own 2 feet, you can work less hours and still make the same amount, but you almost never, unless you were in a partnership of some sort or corporate or other reason or method in which there's more than one owner, you usually cannot totally step out of the picture and your company to not plummet in some way that links to some kind of employee, or there's something going wrong because you weren't there to see it. But there is still the benefit that you could be working less hours and still making the same amount of money, just that it takes a long time to get there. The norm is to report a net loss in your first 1 to 2 years being in business. That said, it's pretty often that businesses don't even make it past that time frame, because maybe the owner was losing so much that they lost everything they had, or they came close to it and shut the company down and went back to some kind of employment or contract work, that was more steady and more guaranteeing of the income. Some people would rather be broke than to have potential of high income but unguaranteed. And that is a reality of a company. You can make potentially lots of money. Some people, like the owner of Facebook, became millionaires even without going to college. But they had to get their knowledge from somewhere, and they still had to have the basic foundation, go through this full process, and bust their butt for hours a week, 68 hours a week, at least in the first 2 years. And sometimes all you can have is a contract accountant that you pay maybe $100 a month to keep your books while you're doing everything else in the first 1 to 2 years. Personally, my company was founded based on the fact that I had too much workload. I had more clients than I could service. I was working 80 hours a week in tutoring, in person and online, but still live. At the time that I was getting so many more clients that it started to cost my health, because I went up to working 80 hours a week and that being 7 days a week. So finally I opened Ace My Course, and I had to hire people right away because I had a good problem. More clients than I could service. In cases like that, I reported a 6-digit net income my first 3.5 months because I opened in August, and as you know, unless you're in a certain industry where there's what they call a fiscal year, then we all report by the calendar year our income and our tax returns. That said, so sometimes starting off as an independent contractor can be the first step so that your business, when it actually becomes a business, will be on good standing as far as already having the foundation of clientele, or otherwise not just getting out there and already making money. So in addition to all these working hours that it will cost you, that can cost you a lot of personal time you will not have, at least for the first while, there's also the reality that it's hard to get a loan for your car, it's hard to get a loan for your house, it's hard to rent a place, and many other ways of being able to have a house, have a car, have a boat, have anything that requires loans, or just straight up, unless you want to straight up buy it in cash, which most of us Americans cannot do. But the same is true about business loan, because they're putting millions, or at least hundreds of thousands, at risk for you, because they don't know any better than you, which actually less than you, if you're even going to be able to pay them back. You can say, yeah, my company's this great, this is how well it will do, but in the reality, it's all an estimate. We cannot really project the future. We don't really know. What's to say the economy won't crash tomorrow, so that your company could be looking like it could be making a 6 days first 12 months, but then in the reality, the economy crashes tomorrow, and then you end up losing money. You lose your house, you lose your car, you lose your business, or go bankrupt or whatever. This sounds scary, but it is the reality. And because of that, you need to consider all these facts of it will be harder to get these certain things that right now as employed, unless you're on commission only, you don't have that hard of a time getting with good credit. And in some cases with okay credit, but having bad credit is going to be a lot worse when you're self-employed. But let's think about profit. So the more you're involved in the running of the business, and the higher percentage of ownership is a higher percentage of the profit that is in your pocket, which is 100% if you're a sole proprietor, meaning one person owned business. However, that same percentage of the profits you get, and say you have in the running of the business, like your impact on decisions made, is the same amount of lawsuit and legal fines, debt, and all other expenses you take on that life-changing kind, like the company getting sued and you lose everything you got, or going bankrupt. If the company goes bankrupt, you take on 100% of all that debt and the prices you pay and destroy your credit, if that's the equivalent of how much of the company you own. And as a sole proprietor or a one-person owned business where you're 100% owner, you're putting your personal assets and personal credit at risk, because you as the sole proprietor / one-person owner are considered as a person. You are the company. It's not separate from you as an individual. That being that, also your everyday behavior will have the biggest impact on the success or failure of the company. If people don't like you already, and you're trying to get employed, self-employed, so you can get away from people, or so you don't have to work with these people you don't like, there's a higher chance your company's going to fail, or at least barely make it if it does get by. Because the public, these people you don't like, are your potential clients, thus your potential source of revenue / income. Now, if you're one that doesn't like to be on your toes all the time, this may not be fit, because some decisions can be urgent. You have to make them in a heartbeat. Be able to make quick, fast, good decisions. Now, a lot of the times you can, which is pretty much majority of the time as far as I know in my 7 years of running my company, that you can take time to make decisions, like let's say hiring people. Well, you don't have to make a decision on the spot. Even if you need the position filled ASAP, you don't have to. And in that, there's a lot more of the time you can take time to sleep on it, or to research, or do some kind of paying additional attention before making the finalized decision. But there will be cases where it has to be urgent. Like I worked at McDonald's when I was in college. I remember as a manager, I was a supervisor, and I was the one on duty at the time when 2 teenagers came running in and tried to rob us. Well, I couldn't just sit there and wait, well, what I wanted this. No, I had to be on the urge and go, because that could have costed a life. They had guns. They were going to rob the cash register. So I had to call for all employees to duck down and go to the back. And I had to, as a manager, I was the one taking on the liability, which in that case could have been somebody's life. And I had to promptly call 911 and go lock all the doors, and lock the doors that go from the dining area to the kitchen to protect my employees. I had to do all I could, because my life would have to go before theirs could, otherwise it'd cost my job. Now, when it came to opening the registers, you may hesitate about that because you don't want to lose money, but the reality, it'd be a lot more costly to lose somebody's life and for you to possibly pay a price because you protected your money and that's what it costed by the robbery. But that's just one example of, yeah, it can get pretty ugly in some cases, but usually you want to check out the market, which includes safety. Like, is there a lot of theft? Is there a lot of murder? Is there a lot of just crime in general that could impact your company? Because a dangerous area, a lot of people who have the money to afford things, especially luxury expenses like tutoring, usually won't go to a company if it's in a dangerous area. But also it's less likely to happen if you're in a low crime area, so you are taking on lower risk, thus costing yourself less potential business when you're in a low crime area. But this is just an example of liabilities you can prevent, or in this case reduce, but not guarantee you won't face, but are also times where you have to make an urgent decision, or it can be life-changing. In this case, it could take a life. But that said, you need to be somebody who can make decisions quick, on your toes, and know what's the right decision in times where that is required. But to also be a good decision maker that thinks about stuff before just snapping to a decision in a more everyday situation. And unless you have like an LLC, a limited liability company, and you're a limited partner that owns a small percentage that doesn't take part in the running of the business, then the general rule is you don't work, you don't earn. No income is guaranteed, which means you also do not have benefits, paid vacation, insurance, or anything like that until you reach a point where you can afford it for yourself and all your employees. Which we'll go through more of this later on about the what kind of businesses. It's a couple lectures down in my tutorial, my course. But we'll go through the different type businesses that will help you determine which one's right. Will be based on how much risk do you want, how much involvement do you want in the running of the company, and do you want to be fully a part of it, or do you just want to invest in it and somebody else run it while you eat part of the profit and maybe invest in other companies and stuff, like a company investor as opposed to a stock investor. Now, before we get to the next tutorial lecture I have made, that's the pros and cons of each type of business, let's first take a look at what are the types of businesses you could consider as your next step in founding a company. If you have taken into consideration everything I have said, they're the good, the bad, the ugly of having a company to begin with. If you have decided that this is worth it, the risk you're taking on, which is easier if you don't have children and you're not married right now, or if you are married or otherwise have a sweetheart and they have some kind of guaranteed income for the family while you are starting this, launching it. So you're not the breadwinner. If you're the breadwinner, this can be a hard time to do it. If you got kids or a spouse that doesn't work, spouse or sweetheart of whatever sort that shares bills. There needs to be somebody in the house that has a guaranteed income if you have a family, or if you're in just one person, you live on your own, or whatever reason that you don't have to support other people, then this would be a good time to do it. Even if you're young and you need to live with mom and dad for a while you get it going, and once you got the money pretty well, then you can be on your own. But you don't want to take too much risk of putting at stake things that you need to provide to your family without having an alternative way to provide it. That said, so if you're certain now that opening a business is right for you, you need to consider, do you want to be a one-person owned business, which would be a partnership, which I had mentioned was where you are the business, so your reputation has a big impact. Or do you want a partnership where it'll be two or more of you that own the company, but requires you to be part in the everyday running? Do you want to be a C corporation, which is what we know big chains like Wells Fargo or Walmart to all be? These are corporations. Big, they make millions. They have usually many locations of the same company, many locations, or service a broad area somewhere like Amazon, where they don't have quote locations, but they do service a huge area. Corporations have shares and stock. So people outside of your company that have part in decisions, especially if they own a high percentage of those shares or stock. And usually and if you get a C Corp, there has to be more than one owner, not just you and then the shareholders, but more than one owner that's the everyday running. A limited liability company is halfway what it says, limited liability. If you're a limited partner, you take a limited amount of profit, but you take also limited responsibility as far as debt, bankruptcy, loss of assets to whatever goes wrong. The limited liability is where, or the limited partnerships are where can be an owner with limited liability you take on, but that means you're also limited impact on the decision making. But that could be potentially a positive if you want to have a share of the profit but not be part of the everyday running of the company, which is what a lot of investors do. Except for those of you that watch Shark Tank, and you know that those investors, they invest, but they also get highly involved, which is why companies that they invest within end up so much better off after their investment. If the owner itself or owners were good enough to do that, they wouldn't have needed the shark. So some investors are like that, and some investors just pretty much, let me throw you the money, but I'm going to consider your skills before deciding if you're worth giving the money to, without worry or less or not too much worry of me losing it, that I'll earn profit back. And if you want to open something like a corporation or a limited liability partnership that will allow such, then you need to decide if you want to be the limited partner that throws in the money but doesn't run it, or do you want somebody like that can supply money but also takes that certain percentage of the profit for the rest of the life of the business, unless their ownership is sold. And if you don't like them, you're going to have to buy part of that ownership by paying them for their share of the company. But you need to decide if you want partnership, a limited liability partnership, or limited liability company. Do you want to be the one that's barely involved and just throws in the money, or do you want to be the one that does the everyday running? People that don't participate in running of the business but own a share usually are the ones that are similar to sharks on Shark Tank as far as they own a part of many different companies but don't participate in the running of it, but still have to check in time to time to know that there is good production and that they're still profiting, or elsewise they'd rather sell their ownership. Now, an S Corp is very similar to a C corporation, like we talked about, companies you know of like Walmart or like My Alternative, Civil Learning Center. They're a big chain. They're all over this country. I'd be shocked if anybody anywhere was watching this video and had never heard of them. I mean, unless you've never looked into tutoring to even be familiar with companies out there in general. I know I'm similar with some industries that I've never shopped within. But the S Corp's difference is the fact that it's one person owned. But it will still have stock and shares to be sold, to be owned by investors outside that you'll have to pay dividends. Just that the only full ownership that's not a simple stock owner is you, which means you're the principal, the eye of the company, the heart, the one that is highly involved in the everyday running. And you cannot be an S Corp and not be part of the everyday running. That's when you go to a C Corp. But in the next section, we'll go over the pros and cons, and I'll go in more depth about which kind would be better for you based on your goals in life. Like I said, your dream of either being involved or not being involved. Do I want the money, but then give up a lot more money, or do I want to be a part of this mission, but also put at risk of being taken on higher liability? My next section is called Forms of Business, which if you have decided by now that you want to, and you have at least an idea of what kind of company you'd want, then you can move forward. But if you have not yet to decide what kind of company, or even narrow it down using this list I have here, then it'd be great to ponder on it, to just get an idea, okay, first, is this really worth it to me? Am I at a stand in life that I can afford the risk? Because it could be a good time in life, or if you have children, it may be better if you wait till they're grown or whatever, that you don't have to worry as much about taking care of them, even though we as parents always want to take care of our kids. Old or young, we still want to. But sometimes if they're adults, it's better to take on higher risk. But that's then again your own decision, and there's other factors to consider. But once you've decided that owning a business is right, and looking at this list and listening to what I've said, you get an idea of a few different types you'd at least like to consider, then you can move to the next step in the next lecture and narrow down, or even possibly fully decide what type of business you want to form. And now here, I'm basically telling you the same thing, so stop now. After you finish this lecture, think about what I was just saying, the types based on things I've already mentioned. Is this really something you want to get into? Can you make it or break it, no matter what it costs in your personal life and or your career? After you've decided, come back and go to the next lecture where I will give you details. But I advise you and I urge you not to go forward until you have pondered on these different things we've discussed for at least 7 days each. Taking notes, making your own pro and con list that's personalized to your type of life. Factors in your life. Priority, everything. Spend at least 7 days on each part. The is it right for me, and the which type would I want if I did open a company, before you go to the next lecture. As far as now, I hope you've got at least that much down, and when you return, we'll be going over our personal goals. Your personal goals will have a big part to do in which you could actually look at right now. While deciding if this is the right thing to go into for your stage in life, your lifestyle, your goals, consider where would you want to be financially, class status, maybe your reputation-wise. Would you rather be a big dog in a neighborhood in the next 5 to 10 years, or would you rather stay a little person and kind of keep to a quiet life? Because a lot of entrepreneurs end up being big dogs, as we call them, or in other words, high influential people in I call it the neighborhood, but it can be the metro area. Like I'm in Houston, Texas. I'm known in the area. Some people have heard my name but don't associate it with my face. Some know my face and know I'm a tutorer, but they don't necessarily know who I am, but they've heard of my company and they're like, oh, I've heard of that. Well, that said, so since it's been founded for so long, right here in the little old town that's now a big city of Katy, Texas, Houston, Texas, and that we've provided services to the Dallas, Fort Worth, and Austin areas of Texas as well as the greater Houston, then I have more of a reputation, which also means easier to get business, but it can also mean have a lot of enemies. So you want to think about that as well. Do you want to build a big reputation, to be a big influence in the community? If so, in what way? And that your financial goals and all need to be part of your deciding whether to go in business. If so, what type of business? And I mean this by form, in addition to industry, such as service or product that will be provided. And compare it to where you stand in life right now. Can you afford this? Do you really, really want it that way? You don't have to be guaranteed income, or you don't even have to know if you'll have a check tomorrow in order to reach that goal, because it's just worth it to you no matter what.